Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. Let's dive into a story about a property owner who thought he could muscle his way into someone else's garden, but quickly learned the hard way that not everyone will bow down to his demands. But before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button, smash the like if you enjoy the content, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a juicy story. Entitled neighbor thinks he can wander into my back garden when he wants. Going to try and set the scene a bit here. My house backs onto a number of flats. I have a little terrace/garden out back that's linked to my property. Below that terrace is a small patio area that's linked to the flats, which they can get access to by their own back door. There are then steps up to my area, which are gated off. I also have a lock gate that allows access to the terrace/garden because I live on a main road. A few months ago, the flat behind me had a problem with their plumbing, and the drain behind was overflowing with literal crap. Obviously, an extremely nasty situation for everybody. When the owner of the flats, we'll call him T, asked if he could come round the back and check the drain, of course we said yes, because we're not total a-holes. After he checked the drain, he said he'd need somebody to come out, check it, and drain it. We agreed, but made it clear we would need to be made aware before it happened as stipulated in our rental agreement with the letting agent. He said fine. We got notice before any work was done so we could ensure our gate was unlocked. I thought that was the end of it. And boy, was I wrong. A few weeks later, I was at home and heard my front gate open. I found it odd because my boyfriend wasn't due home from work for a little while and nobody knocked on the door. The door to my house is immediately next to the gate, so it's seconds between the gate opening and a knock. When the gate went a second time, I looked outside to find T walking away. Obviously, he'd entered my property without my consent. Wanting to give him the benefit of the doubt, believing that he just wanted to check the drain one last time, I didn't say anything about it, just letting it slide. A couple days later, my boyfriend, who had given him his number to deal with the drain issue, got a phone call from him saying he needed to gain access to the back of our property, and why did we have our gate locked? As my boyfriend said, we were both at work and neither could come home to deal with this request, and if he needed something to speak to the letting agents, he just hung up. I spoke to my boyfriend and we collectively came to the decision that we would keep the gate locked at all times, even when we were in, because I didn't feel comfortable with him just walking into my property as and when he felt like it. And he didn't like that. The next time he tried to get in, my boyfriend was at home and I was at work. When he opened the gate, he got a stream of abuse from T, asking why we'd locked the gate when he had permission to have access to the back when he wants, and there's a note in our rental agreement to state this. He threatened to get solicitors on us if we didn't leave the gate open or give him a key to get in when he wanted. It was here, he said, because he had renovated the house, he deserved to gain access on his terms, even though he wasn't our landlord. My boyfriend just told him to take it up with the letting agent if there was a problem and shut the door on his face. When I got home, I combed through my rental agreement and found there was no such note in place. The only thing I could find about access was we required 24 hours notice for any work or access to the property, including the garden. Unless it was urgent and they required access sooner. But they still had to provide detail in writing about any work that would be done even within 24 hours. Because of this, I told the letting agent, who had communication with T, that he would have to ask for access to my garden via them, and I require the written notice as stipulated in my contract. They agreed to pass the message on. Things cooled a bit, but the problem with the drain started again. We could see it was overflowing, and apparently T was aware, but we hadn't heard anything from him or the letting agent about when someone would come and deal with it. This was when I got my own back. I'm probably a bad person for this, but at this stage, I had enough. T turned up with the drainage company on a day that I was at home unwell. I was lying on the sofa when I heard a van pull up and somebody try to open the gate, but of course it was locked. The bell went and I considered getting up and answering the door, but when I heard T's voice, I decided I wasn't going to feed his entitlement. I just lay back down, stuck my earplugs in, and tried to go back to sleep. For the next 30 or so minutes, he tried to get in, constantly ringing the bell, knocking loudly on my window, shouting into the house, screaming at what I can only assume was my boyfriend on the phone, but I ignored it all. Eventually, he got the message and left. When my boyfriend came home from work, he came back to give us a verbal dressing down, threatening legal action again, etc., because he needed access to the property and we didn't provide it. I pointed out that neither of us were in when he turned up. My blinds were shut, nobody can see in, so he didn't know I was off sick, and he didn't give us the agreed notice that he would require access, and in the future, I'll no longer be dealing with him. If he wants access to go through the letting agent, and the next time I find him in my garden, I'm ringing the police for trespassing, he was still threatening me, so I told him to go for it because I get free legal advice due to a membership I had, and if he really wants to go down that route, be my guest. I've honestly never seen somebody shut up so quickly. He said he'd go through the letting agent in the future, and I said good choice, and shut the door in his face. After that, he solely dealt with the letting agent and followed all instructions once he knew I had access to free legal advice. The best part about this whole incident was he could have checked the drain from his own property and never needed access to my garden. He just wanted to flex his muscles and thought he could bully us because we were a young couple. I just don't understand the thought process of cretins like this. Like, what in the hell was the motivation here? Is he a voyeur? Is he just a bored landlord that has nothing better to do? And our second story. The neighbor's children are damaging my property. There's a group of neighborhood kids, probably around 12 to 14 years old, who seem to have zero respect for my property or that of my neighbors. I live in a triangular lot bordered by a road on one side and an alleyway on the other. Naturally, this setup seems to tempt them to cut through the middle of my yard to get from one side to the other. My wife and I have asked them multiple times not to do so whenever we catch them in the act. At first, they would mumble some half-hearted apology as they continued walking through our yard, barely acknowledging our request. But over time, their behavior has escalated. They've started talking back to us, and not just in a snarky way, they've been downright nasty, openly mocking my wife to her face when she's asked them to leave our property. They've also started causing damage, trampling our flower beds, kicking over garden decorations, and even breaking a section of our wooden fence. Yesterday, things took an even more troubling turn. One of them walked through the yard carrying a BB gun. When I asked him if there was something I could help him with, his response was, "What's your problem, man?" I calmly reiterated for what felt like the 20th time that we had nothing against them playing in the neighborhood, but we wanted them to respect our property. Instead of listening, he cursed at me, called me a racial slur, and continued ranting as he walked away down the alley. To try to deter them, we've installed security cameras at the entrances to our house and put up no trespassing signs all along the property line. They're impossible to miss. But the situation has really started to affect our family life. I have 3 kids under the age of 6, and I just built them a singlet. I want them to be able to enjoy their backyard the way I did as a kid, coming in and out as they please. But now my oldest daughter is scared to be in her own yard because of these little punks who just won't stay out of our space. I know exactly where these kids live in the neighborhood, and it's been tempting to go talk to their parents about the damage and disrespect. However, given how these kids behave, I wouldn't be surprised if they learned it at home. I'd put up a fence if we weren't planning on moving next year, but that doesn't seem worth the effort right now. After the incident with the BB gun and the damage to my property, I had enough. I called the police and reported the trespassing and harassment, hoping that a visit from an officer might put an end to this nonsense. And our last story. Neighbors built on my property. Last year, I purchased some property almost sight unseen at auction. It's 14 acres total, and the highlight for me was a farmhouse that hadn't been cared for in quite some time. After getting the property and finalizing all the payment, I contracted with the surveyor to give me the exact details, and to my surprise, there was also a barn, patio, and fire pit area that was my property. One weekend a few months ago, I walked over to that part of the property and saw that the barn was in very updated shape, with electric, water, etc., all having been run up there. In fact, that end of the property was more kept up than the house. Think of it as 2 ends of a large L shape. While I was in the barn, a sheriff's car pulled right up. The deputy confronted me. I explained this was my property, etc. A minute later, another car pulled up. Out came Ken and Barbie. They'd called 911, stating there was someone trespassing on their property. I explained the situation to all 3 of them. The deputy seemed keenly interested. Ken and Barbie kept interrupting me, explaining this was their barn, their patio, their everything. I had the surveyor's papers with me in a folder. He advised Ken and Barbie that I probably wasn't trespassing and that there'd probably need to be real estate lawyers involved. 2 more surveys and 2 opinions from competing lawyers agreed that this part of the property was indeed mine. Ken and Barbie bought the adjacent property 4 years prior and were under the impression that the disputed area was part of their property. They renovated and turned it into an event center holding wedding receptions, birthday parties, etc. in the barn. Everything they used as part of that business is on my property. Multiple surveys have confirmed that. I've been advised that adverse possession does not apply as they've not used it anywhere near long enough to count in my state, and they cannot produce any documentation that indicates they were given any permission from the prior owner in any fashion to use this. I don't want to own or be responsible for an event venue center. I offered to sell them their end of the L at what I and my real estate agent considered reasonable market value. They said they couldn't possibly afford it. I offered to lease them the property in exchange for a % of gross revenue plus them holding all insurance and liability. They said they couldn't afford to run the business that way. Their last offer was that I would receive a few $100s a month, which would barely cover insurance alone, to say nothing of upkeep, and I said no. Ken and Barbie explained they already had multiple bookings for the spring and summer and needed the property or else they would have to return deposits. I remain steadfast that I want them to hold the insurance and pay me a lease or else it'll just sit there. They failed at the most basic part of property ownership, knowing where your property lines are. It sucks for them that they sunk so much money into a property they don't actually own and have no right to use. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.